We're going to start now talking about, we're finishing up on the money, because you have to remember that everything that's happening to you and why you're working so hard and why you're paying the taxes and you can't seem to get ahead, most people are like this, or your grandmother's out flipping burgers, you know, because her pension isn't enough, so she's down at the McDonald's, whatever. We're just going to do, remember last time we did what happened at 1913? Today we're going to do several little things that happened in 1776. Now next year I might have this ready to put out. I just have my own list of special dates, and when you go through the dates and what happened on those dates, it gives you a pretty clear picture of what was going on at the time. So this will be 1776. Well, this chalk isn't very long. I have all little short bits of chalk, but never mind. In 1776, this is what happened. The Declaration of Independence. Okay. Now remember in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was put in, so was the income tax. Now remember this. Private bankers love to lend to governments because when they lend to governments, their interest is guaranteed through the taxing the people. So anyone who thinks now that their taxes go into infrastructure, go into health, go into things for them, forget it. Okay? Here's the debt. Here's the debt, just our debt. The state owes trillions, but this is ours. Here's the original debt right here, 5%. That's our real debt, 5%. Do you know how many times we paid it off? We paid that debt over and over and over and over. That's called, you know, compound interest. Interest upon interest upon interest. So that's why the debt can never be paid, and that's why our hydro, our health care, all our other assets, social infrastructure, going. They want to take it all away, and Harper's going to be there with his little hatchet. Martin is bad enough, because he's nothing like his father. But Harper, you're going to think even Harris was mild compared with, if they get in, the so-called conservatives, believe me, with what will happen. So, on the same date, 1776, the Illuminati was founded. Of course, they were kicked out of Bavaria after that when it was found, their papers were found by accident. So this Illuminati that everyone talks about, all these people on these shows that are too afraid to give those names, will give you this name here. So that's why once I phoned into Gary Bell and I gave him the names. Now, the Illuminati, here we go. And I'll tell you about the Illuminati. I've got it right here. Founded on May the 1st by Dr. Adam Weishaupt, professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University, Bavaria. Now, Weishaupt was a convert from Judaism to Catholicism, just like Michael Koren, by the way. The goal of the order was to found a world government to be ruled by the intelligentsia, who were the only ones capable of bringing peace. But that meant destroying the old world order. Now, who mentored Weishaupt? Who mentored Weishaupt? Rothschild. That's who mentored Weishaupt, okay? In 1776, another thing happened. The House of Rothschild was formally, officially founded. Officially founded. Now, I have a very valuable book that was published by the House of Rothschild. It cost about $85. They had a big exhibition here a few years back, and someone in my family bought the book, and I copied the book. So in the fall, I will circulate the book, but it's quite hilarious because it's sort of just a self-aggrandizement, the book, but it lists every member of the family. And in 1776, another thing happened. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. That all happened in 76. So So we don't know exactly which happened first, what month, what day. But the point is, what you have here all the time is whenever people try and get away from this, whenever they do that, something equally strong happens on the other side. No, that can't be happening. We'll do this and this. We'll get this. Bank of England was set up in 1649 as a private bank. Of course it was a private bank. And the people who set it up, what's his name, Cromwell, worked with the bankers in Holland to have Charles I beheaded. Once he was beheaded, the way was clear for the other guy to come in from Holland, but basically it was done to set up the Bank of England, which is why the Americans wanted to get on their own and become independent from that kind of a money system. As I said before, it had nothing to do with the tax on tea. So, those are some special dates there. Now, here's another little surprising thing. After all this, we come up to today, and the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be the money manager of the United States, okay? Their money manager. They are the largest creditor of the United States. They are the ones that the United States owes most of the money to. But they, in the beginning, said, we will be the money manager. This will be good. They were like Hamilton. Hamilton, whom the LaRoucheites just adore, they don't even know, these people are so ignorant, they don't even know that Hamilton was in favor of a private bank. He was in favor of the presidency lasting a lifetime. So he was in with this kind of thing, the money manager. So now the United States owes everything it has to their money manager. The Federal Reserve is the biggest creditor of the United States. If you had a money manager, and 10 years later, he owned your car, your house, what would you do? Would you get rid of him? Yeah. Would you get rid of him or what? But they didn't get rid of him, and the Federal Reserve stayed in. Now, about the colonies, I'll get over this in a minute, just hang in there. The Bank of England in 1776 ran up the debt purposely so that they'd have an excuse to tax the colonies. They ran up the debt. Now, I explained to you how they ran up the debt. The deficit was inflated like that by Martin. That's what I mean. We have no choice here. The deficit, Martin took the assets that were worth millions, 50 million for a bridge, 49 million goes in here to inflate the deficit. $1, I told you, goes on the other side. This is what they did for years. That's how they inflated the deficit. And the Reagan government, oh yeah, Ronnie's gone. Of course, he's 93, passed away. And they're doing a huge, it's almost like another movie, because he's the big hero. Supposedly he stopped the Cold War, all of that. No, he didn't. He had Alzheimer's before we were told. He probably had it for 10 years. Bush tried to get rid of him by that guy shooting him. That didn't get rid of Reagan. He hung in there and hung in there. But he had it long before people knew that he had it. So the debt was inflated. And the colonies were taxed. Not only that, so when they got over that by producing their own money.
You say the Bank of England?
Yeah.
How do you inflate that?
Were you here last week?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I explained. The way Martin did it, all you have to do is take your assets and call them expenses. When you call your asset an expense, look, it's like you having $50,000 in the bank. Let me explain it this way. This is what the government did. You wouldn't get away with it. No, you wouldn't. If you had $50,000 in the bank, you took that and you put it down on a house. You bought a $200,000 house, you moved in, okay? You've made your investment, you've got your equity in the house is starting to go up, you've got a roof over your head, so you have invested that $50,000. But if you were to call it an expense on your income tax, I'm sorry, they're not going to buy that. Then if you had the roof over your head, your $50,000 invested, and you called your friends and said, oops, I've got no money. Can you bring me some food? I'm broke. I'm in a situation of deficit here. I have nothing. My expenses have been terrible. I've spent my $50,000 this year. But you don't tell them that you've spent your $50,000 buying this home that you're now living in. Well, that's what Martin did. Every bridge, everything asset, bridges, buildings, whatever, everything that was built or done, they take $1, that's in the asset side here, $1, and over here, they call it an expense. They call the investments they've made in our country expenses.
But that was done way before Martin, and it's been done.
It was done for 40 years, Wendy.
Yeah.
I'm talking about him to tell you that he's the only one who ever changed it so that he could crow about balancing the budget. That's what happened. Yes, it went on for 40 years, and it probably will go on again. So when you take your investments and you put them over here, they all go into the deficit, and the deficit becomes huge. And the Reagan government said, they admitted, we inflated the deficit so that we could cut the social programs. So whatever kind of bookkeeping you need, you can do. Economics, as I said, it's like engineering. You can engineer economics around any philosophy you want. You can engineer it so that it's on a fascist philosophy, which is what they have now. You are a liability. You don't deserve to live unless you have a job, and you put so much money into the pot. That's the fascist philosophy. So this is what they do, so that you will be cut out of the equation. This is what we've been living under now, and this is why they're telling us we have to sell the hydro, we have to have premiums for health care now, and nobody ever asks them, but where is all my tax money going? It's going basically to interest, to pay down a phony debt that's hooked into these people here. And just to prove this to you, I will just give you the basic history with what happened, okay? Before we got to this point, so that you'll understand why we followed the United States. We didn't have to, but we were talked into it, coerced. So, in 1867, this is about us, the British North America Act, okay, granted the government the responsibility to raise capital through issuance and control of our currency. The government's control of our currency to raise capital based upon the resources and wealth of our nation now. So they used to do it the way I told you they should do it. Money should have been based on all our resources, and part of that's us. We are part of the resources. They call us human resources. We used to be personnel, now we're human resources. But they use us up just like they do the lumber. So, based upon, now Trudeau didn't alter this, he just added the Human Rights Act. Then, 45 years later, okay, in 1913, okay, the government passed an amendment to the BNA Act, okay? An amendment. 1913, remember those dates? Passed an amendment without a referendum. Nobody knew this. They passed an amendment which gave our issuance of money and credit to the private banks. Oh yes. Private banks could issue our money then, okay? And that was in 1913, so obviously it came directly from that. Then, now here's the good part. In 1935, this is where we are different from the US. This is why we only have a $600 billion debt instead of Trillions. The U.S. has trillions. And somebody came on the radio, I forget who it was, and they asked him, how much money do the Rothschilds own now? And he said, oh, it's in the thousands of trillions. Thousands of trillions. Well, of course, it's all being sucked up to the top of the pyramid. So anyway, Mackenzie King then amended the charter of the Bank of Canada in 1935. Now, this is what he did. He said that he was going to give back to the bank 100% creation of money. But he was friends with Rockefeller. In fact, he was so friendly that when Rockefeller had those men massacred at some mine that he owned, he went to court and as a character reference for Rockefeller. So Mackenzie King, I guess, is he the one that used to talk to his dead mother all the time? Anyway, aside from talking to dead people, he got elected when he said, I will give 100% creation of money back to the bank. After he got elected, he only gave the bank 50% creation of money. But at that point, it was better than nothing. The private bank still had 50% creation of money. And you know how money is created, right? Or do you want me to go through the Goldsmith thing again? When you don't have anything in the safe to cover your receipts, you are creating money. So what we have to do with banks is not do away with them. Private banks come in handy, but not allow them to create money. They can only lend what they actually have in the bank. They cannot lend what they do now 400 times what they have in the bank. For every 400 a private bank lends, it might be lucky to have $1 in there. That's what you call creating money. If you had nothing in your cupboard in the house and you decided you would write your own little monopoly money and you'd go out and spend it, if people believed you could back those monopoly certificates, you could create money and use it. If they didn't believe you, it wouldn't be money. Money is the most brilliant idea that civilization ever had. Money gets things done. You can't go around bartering the rest of your life. Well, maybe I don't want 20 books or 8 pairs of shoes. I mean, it's going to take me forever to... We need the coupons. We need the tickets. Money is the best idea that civilization ever had. The only problem is who issues and controls our best idea, which is money. That's the problem. As long as government and the people decide we control the issuance of our money, then money behaves the way it should behave. So to blame the money, no, it's foolish. And to insist that all of civilization can exist on barter is just as crazy. Certain areas, small functioning hamlets or whatever, could do that maybe. But if we're ever to stop destroying the planet, if we're ever to get rid of useless jobs that create toxic waste, if we're ever to have environmental health, we have got to get rid of this money system, because this is a system that's got so much interest in it that it's constantly, this is the engine that drives this fallacy about everyone has to have a job, everyone has to have a job. No, they don't. And we don't want things constantly produced and produced and produced. It's a small planet. We should only be producing what is useful to us, or what is arty, useful, whatever, something that makes life pleasant. Why should we be producing toxic plastics by the ton and all of this just for the sake of, well, I've got a job. Well, unless I have a job, per se, I'm not going to be fit to live, am I? What a load of crap. And I explained how last week everything is based on volunteer and free labor and slave labor anyway, which it is. So they are the biggest hypocrites and liars that ever lived, these banking things. Yes, Marion?
I'm just trying to get this straight. In 1913, did the private banks issue all the money?
After the Fed got in, yes. Every money, every cash, credit, change, whatever that came out of the Federal Reserve.
And Mackenzie King took back 50% of that.
Well, this is Canada. Now in 1913, they did the same thing to us, okay? In 1913, obeying the states, they did the same thing to us. And in 1935, Mackenzie King promised, if you elect me, I will give 100% creation of money back to the Bank of Canada. I'll give it back. He got in, he only gave 50% because he was pals with Rockefeller. Now what happens? When you have 50% public and 50% private, over the last, since 1935, our government now has gone down to 2% creation of money, just the change in your pocket. 98% of our money now coming out, we might as well be with the Fed, because that's exactly what's happening. 98% of it is money coming out as loans, loans that these banks cannot back up, loans that they charge interest on, and that is why it's called, this is a social debt monetary system, a social debt. Oh, we're all paying the debt. We are. That's what it means. Social debt, people pay the debt. We are paying unnecessary debt, and this is all the interest-free money we have now. And it happens very easily. See, if he'd given 100%, it wouldn't have happened. But because it was divided in half, and Rockefeller knew this. He knew this when he coerced Mackenzie King into doing it this way. Because if you, it's like give them an inch, they take a yard. Little by little, since 74, was when the biggest spike went in our debt, when Chrétien was finance minister, and it's been going on ever since. And then Mulroney, they were taking out of the Bank of Canada, our bank, our government was getting all the loans for our infrastructure at no interest from the Bank of Canada. Now, all they did to give us this debt, it's quite simple, was remove little by little every loan for infrastructure we had and place it with their private banking friends. That's all. That's all they did. Until now, we're down to 2%. And if you talk about giving the creation of money back to the Bank of Canada, you know what they'll say? Inflation, inflation. Ooh, we'll get inflation. No, you won't. Say that these are two people, and I give one $50 and the other $50. A week later, one person comes to me and said, look, I only have $20 left in my drawer, 30 is missing. And I find out the other guy, private guy, has it, and I said, okay, take the 30, give it back now, belongs there, give it back. I'm not creating more money. There's still the same amount of money. But it's simply being taken from the interest-bearing private banks and being put back into the non-interest-bearing national bank. And let the private banks lend only what they have. Do not allow them to create money, or we're all going to end up on the curbstone with a tin cup, when that's what's happening now, everybody. So this is a history of it here. So 1935, he did that.
The look of the bill? Does it look different?
No, what happened with the, well, we'll get on to Kennedy, but what happened when they called the Lincoln's money greenbacks because it was a special color green, it had no interest on it, and that's why they assassinated him. Then Kennedy put out about, $4 billion or something, a lot more. And I've got copies of those notes, and it says on it, doesn't say Federal Reserve, it just says United States money, United States, and then the amount. But all the money now in the States says Federal Reserve note. He bypassed that, and I have the copies of it. So he went down too.
Just so that I can understand this, the cash that the few dollars that we have in our pocket, that's just for minor expenses?
Yeah.
The creation of the money is really when they issue a mortgage or a loan or...
Yes.
That's what you mean by...
To you or to the government. All those loans go out as our credit and our money. You see?
You're saying that the money is created, it's really the loans. It's not that they go out and actually print up money.
No, they don't print money. But when you get a loan at a bank, you start writing checks. It's called checkbook money. You don't go to the bank and load your sock up with all the money. You start writing checks, paying off this account, that account. Your check flies to another bank. It goes into someone else's account. It comes out of yours. It's called checkbook money. That's what their money is called.
So even when you write your own personal check, you yourself have just made in a sense, some money.
Yes.
Only thing is-
No. You're not creating money because that money's in your account. If you write a check to someone and your check bounces, not only will you have to pay the check, you will have to pay a charge for bouncing that check. No. What happens is, especially with governments, when
you agree to a mortgage, in a sense, you're creating money.
No, you're not. No, you're not. When you go in, listen, no. A mortgage is not money. A mortgage is a debt. Mort means death. Gage means grip. Mortgage is death grip. When you pass your mortgage on to your children instead of a real property that you own, you're passing on the debt to them. A mortgage is not creating money. It's a debt. So money is created by these banks when they lend you $50,000, okay? They lend you that because you have collateral. That's another thing. You're not going to get a dime unless you have something they can claim if you don't pay. So you don't get money unless you have money or something that they can take if you don't pay the bill. So when they issue you the $50,000, you have to give them collateral for that. It could be a house, it could be a piece of land, whatever that they can get their hands on. So they issue you the $50,000, but try this sometime. If you went to the bank with a briefcase and you said, okay, now I'm here, I'm collect my $50,000, thank you. You've passed, you're going to get the loan, you've been approved. And you went with your briefcase and said, okay, now I want it in denominations of 20s or 50s. Just fill it up here, the 50,000, please. You wouldn't get anything like that. You only get the money from thin air, that you get a checkbook that you can use for the money on thin air, and if they had to even give you 30,000, they'd have to close the bank. Okay? They wouldn't even have that much in the bank. One woman in the States went to the bank one day just to take out her own money she had, about 30,000 in the account. She got the money, and then as she left, they put a sign on the door, closed. The banks do not have any cash. They have just enough to make transactions so that people can go to the teller and withdraw whatever from their paycheck. That's all. So that's what happens. They loan you the 50,000, maybe 500 other people have got a 50,000 loan out there. You were all writing checks on it, but guess what you're doing? In the meantime, you're paying interest. Do they tell you where to go for the interest? No. And when you can't pay that interest, you get foreclosed. And that's the best scam in the world. And they get your real estate or your fancy car or whatever, and they sell it for whatever price they want. You get a little bit out of it, but they get their debt paid. They will get their debt paid. So no, when you sign a mortgage, what money are you creating? You're becoming a debt slave right then and there. And so, of course they need us, but we don't need them. But they've got most people convinced that it's the other way around. We need them. We have to go and beg from them. The same with governments. So this is what's so silly, absolutely silly. Oh, the country has all these resources, the mines, the farms, the people working, the companies. Why should any country go to people like this and say, please give us credit? Give us a good credit rating, give us some credit, you people, the bankers. They don't need them at all. That's what's so ugly about this particular scam. None of it's needed.
What would they do if the government say, okay, we don't need you, we just annul all of the, what would happen?
Well, Guernsey does it that way, and Chavez said that, and they tried to do the coup on him, and then his own soldiers brought him back, but he's got to watch his back all the time now. They've got their people down there now out in the streets, paying them to protest. The whole right wing, the corporate crowd are out there now trying to get him out of government. That's what they do, because he said, well, we don't need you. I don't want your loans. We're going to do it ourselves.
So what's going on then with things like the modern dollar that they have in the market, or the Ithaca dollar?
Yeah, Marion, the Ithaca dollar is only good for 50 miles around Ithaca, okay? You cannot have a complex civilization, and this dollar only works for 50 miles here, this dollar will work to the next 50 miles here. It's okay in a very small way, but it doesn't do anything to help this. It doesn't do anything to help the fact that the whole planet now is a plantation. We're all slaves. The small group at the top, they own us, we're indebted to them. We have to keep working, we have to have jobs doing whatever they tell us we're going to do. This is slavery. It's called debt slavery.
Who's issuing that money, the $100, the $50?
I haven't got a clue who's issuing it, and I hope it works for a small area, but that's all it's ever going to work for. The let's dollars, I mean, you can only do that in so much area, and then you've got to expand, unless you want civilization to be reduced to little enclaves, little city-states all over the globe that have to, and then you have to have, oh, is your dollar good here? No, it's not. Here's my dollar. Come on. This will not do it on a global level. The whole scam has to go. Governments have to start issuing money without interest on it. You have to understand that if money first comes out, when it comes out and it's done nothing, it's performed nothing. It's a crime to put interest on new money. This is new money we're talking about, and that is a crime to add interest to new money. So when you take a government and you say, okay, now you pay us, and you have to pay us so much interest, the people are taxed and taxed and taxed for that. That is debt slavery.
I don't know if you spoke about this last week, you may have, I wasn't here. Did you talk about the gold standard?
The gold standard is absolute nonsense. It's even Keynes agreed with that. What happens with the gold standard? Number one, gold is not worth as much as water. Number two, basing your dollar on one resource and not on all of them is crazy. But the gold standard works when you have this kind of a scam, because the same people hoard the gold. They hoard the gold. Sure, how much gold have you got in your house? Have you got any coins? And then Roosevelt told everyone at some point after the Depression, take everything gold you have in your house, give it to me, send it to me, this will help the country. And all the poor fools sent all their gold in, they had nothing. And the gold ended up somewhere in England in the safe there. There's nothing in Fort Knox. So this is what happens. So the gold standard is just nonsense. Yeah.
What is the difference in function between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and which one of them actually prints the American dollar?
The Treasury prints the dollars, and the Treasury is part of the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is described, it's self-described as the money manager of the United States. That's what they're supposed to be doing, and yet they are the biggest creditor of the United States. They own most of the United States now. See, if you look at this as the way it really is, a scam, you'll understand it much better. But if you take an economics degree, and I've had people in this course who've got degrees in economics, you will not learn anything about the reality of the scam. You will only learn the jargon of the scam. And you will come out of those 4 years still not knowing how money is created. And you will believe, when you come out of the 4 years, you will believe that it's okay to have your money created by a private group who charge your government interest. And they'll just say, well, isn't that the way it is? Isn't that the way it is? No. And that's why America said in the beginning, Congress shall have control and of the value of money and shall issue the money and control thereof. They should have said only Congress. They didn't say only Congress because they didn't know what exactly was going to go on. So to get back to 1935 here, now he reneged on that. Now guess what happened in 2001? Guess what happened? Something hideous. The bonds of the Bank of Canada are now managed from a Texas company in the US. Yeah, they are. Yep, in 2001. And then I'll just add in here in 1991, just before that, what happened? The reserve of the Bank of Canada was ended. The reserve in the bank, there was about 3%. And the reserve in the bank is this. The United States still has it. The Bank of Canada said to all the private banks, just so you don't go mad with speculation, you have to leave a certain percentage of what you have with us in the Bank of Canada to sort of rein them in before they went nuts. And it was only 3%. But then that was ended in 1991. And guess how that was ended now? By the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, who said, There doesn't need to be any reserve in the Bank of Canada because the private banks made a lot of rotten deals in Mexico and they had to bail themselves out. So the Bank of Settlement said, okay, give the reserve, just give it back to the banks. Get them out of trouble here. So now we have no reserve in the Bank of Canada to stop these people from going nuts, issuing 400, 500 times what they actually have. And that was done in 1991. Reserve was ended. So now that's where we are today. And the Bank of Canada, although it's still, now you'll see there's a charter. This page is the charter of the Bank of Canada, actually. There's the clause that says that the Bank of Canada can lend to government. Yes, right there. This one here is about Kennedy and all the money that he issued. And this is from the Treasury Department. And the person that sent me this was an American, a monetary reformer somewhere in Utah, or somewhere down there, sent me a huge package all about this, and he's got the exact amounts. Because everybody said, oh, Kennedy didn't do that. Yes, he did, and here's the letter. And it says here, note, during the Kennedy administration, approximately, it looks like 400 billion, oh, here it is down here, 4,292 million was the amount issued by Kennedy. Okay? Now, all that was needed was 322 million, but he issued 4 billion and some odd. And it says here, and Lincoln issued 450 million. And you know what? If he hadn't issued that interest-free, the United States would be in deeper debt today. He issued 450 million, and he saved billions of dollars because it had no interest on it, okay? So the John F. Kennedy notes were series of 1963. They have not been issued since his assassination. And this letter is dated 1971. So it says, please note the difference between the amount required in circulation of 322 million and the amount issued by Kennedy of 4,292 million. So that's proof that he did issue it, and that's one of the reasons, well, the biggest reason they got rid of him, but they don't want to talk about that. Nobody's allowed to talk about this, the biggest crime in civilization today. There's no classes on it, there's nothing in economics about it. It's just the scam is taught. So that was that there. This is what's happened to us. So now we're down to 2%, and in 2001, what did I say here would happen? Oh yeah, 2001, a U.S. company, private, has taken over the administration of the Canadian bonds. And that's something else you don't know about. So you think, so Harper, all that business is part of this. Harper, he's a Republican. The whole damn Conservative Party, they're all Republicans. They know all this. They know how we're hooked into this same scam.
You don't have the name of that company.
I have it at home. If you call me, I have it in the file. I can give you the name. Now, here's the actual scam that happens with the Fed. I'm going to describe to you now the insanity that got the U.S. in debt. Total, and well, how far over? I can rub this out, right? I'm going to describe to you now what the Federal Reserve does so that it owns most of the United States today. And it's owned by those people. Those are what people on shows like Gary Bell and Art Bell and all this, if they talk about it, they call them the Illuminati, and nobody knows who they are. Nobody gives names, but that's who they are. So this is what happens. The government needs money to pay bills or to build something. Now, in the old days, when the government, under, say, Lincoln or Jackson, especially Jackson, and in the beginning of America, they said, okay, these are the resources here, everything we own, the people are out here, we're going to build a bridge with certificates for the people so they can share in the resources because they build things out of them, they add value to them. So money will be going out to the people. And of course it won't have any interest on it, it's never done anything, it's new money. So that's what they did. Then, And the bankers and the people, the government fought back and forth. There was various, it was sort of back and forth between private people and public government with who issued the money over the first few years in the United States, right up until Jackson. And since Jackson, there's never been any interest-free money ever issued, not since Jackson, okay? So this is what happens. It gets in 1913, so the government needs money. They can't print their own, supposedly. We can't do our own credit issuing money, so we got to go to the Fed. Now this is a fact, and it's the same in Canada. Any country that can issue a bond is based on all your resources. Bonds are good. Canada bonds are good. American bonds were good. So if a country can issue its own bonds, if the government can issue bonds, it can issue its own money. Doesn't need a middleman, because the money and the bonds are backed by the same resources. That's a fact. That's mathematically clear. So that's how it was operating, and also with us. Now, this is what happens today. The government needs money for infrastructure. It goes to the Fed. It gives the Fed its government bonds, okay? The Fed gets the bonds, all right? And the bonds are backed by all these resources. So the government goes to the Fed with the bonds. The Fed produces money, bills, whatever. They buy about $500 worth of paper, really nice paper, to do the bills and the certificates and whatever. And they give it back to the government, and the government goes off to pay its debts. There's only one catch. That $500 that they've paid for that good paper, and you can put a $1,000 bill or whatever, you can put whatever number on that piece of paper you want, and it becomes worth that number. So they give the government these bills, and the government pays debts or bills, whatever. And then they say to the government, okay, we just issued you $20 billion. You have to pay interest on that. All they did was print it. All they did was buy the paper, $500, okay? So then the government goes off to pay debts plus interest on the bonds, on the certificates and the money that the Fed has just put out. So that's at interest to the government there. Then, on top of that, that's the first part of it. Now then, the Fed, the bonds that have been given to the Fed, they then sell them at a profit. What a scam. What could be better? It seems unreal, doesn't it? The government needs money to pay debts, to build infrastructure. It goes to the Fed. The Fed pays for nice paper, thick paper, rolls off money, rolls off certificates worth the billions, whatever they need, and then gives it back to the government here. Here's your money. The government then starts paying interest on the paper that has cost the Fed $500 to print. Got that? Then the Fed takes the bonds that represent real resources and sells them at a profit. What could be a better scam than that? The money manager.
Sydney, this must have made sense to somebody logically at some point. How did they come to this deal in the first place that made sense to anybody? I don't understand.
Assassinations.
They know us.
I understand.
Assassinations.
So there's never been any logic you can say this makes sense.
It started with, did you hear the Goldsmith story last week? That's how it started. And then it built up. This is what happened. Royalty, other people in the peerage were in debt. They would be gambling. They would be keeping mistresses. They'd go to the Rothschild family or the Schiff family or somebody and say, look, lend me something. If they couldn't pay it, then these people got titles, lands, or sometimes they married off ugly daughters to Earl or whatever the peerage. Here, take my daughter, your debt will be wiped out, whatever. So then you have a lot of titles in Europe now that were all bought like that. Then, as long as that went along and everything was fine, nothing happened. But once the Bank of England got going, and Rothschild became the owner, you might say, of most of England, and you all know how that happened. Wellington, Napoleon, Rothschild is in the stock exchange. He has a special agent over there. He knows ahead of time of everybody else because they had a wonderful espionage system. Espionage is about money. It's always been about money. You got to get there first. So he knew that Napoleon had lost, but he looked as if Napoleon had won. He put on the act of all depressed and everything, and he started selling his British bonds. They were called consols, but they were bonds representing the resources of the country. His agents are starting to sell them off, and everyone's looking at him, because the stock market is another scam. It's just rumors. It's all built on rumors. And the one we have now is the most overvalued stock market that's ever been. Anyway, he's standing there looking very sad. And so he starts, the Rothschild group are selling all the British bonds. Everybody else start to sell theirs. Oh my God, look, Napoleon must have won. Sell, sell, sell. Our bonds will be worth nothing. So by the time all the bonds, British bonds, were down to this, maybe a penny, he bought them all up. He gave his agents the nod. They started buying up all the cheap bonds. And when everybody found out that Wellington had won, the bonds were, whoo, and Rothschild owned England. And he was already in the Bank of England. So then they just hopped over and figured they'd own America too. So, but when it gets to the point where these presidents, and they were the first ones who opposed the scam and tried to keep introducing their own money created by government, most of the ones who tried that were assassinated. I mean, here, just let me, I've got my list here now. Listen to this. This is good. Oh yes, Jackson, they attempted to kill him, but they didn't kill him. He actually lived through it. In 1865, after Jackson, Lincoln was assassinated. In 1881, Garfield was shot. In 1901, William McKinley was assassinated. And these people, I read their speeches. They all talked about the money. The money. We've got to, do something about the money. So when things get too hot, presidents who've tried to do that have been assassinated, right up to Kennedy. He just went ahead and issued United States notes. That's what it said on the notes that I have at home. And within 3 months, boom, he was gone. So even in the most so-called up-to-date books on what really happened with Kennedy, it was more than one reason to kill him. A lot of people hated him. He wanted to take away the power of the Federal Reserve. He said that, the power of the CIA. He wasn't in favor of the Bay of Pigs thing. It made him look like an idiot, So as soon as he issued that money, he was a dead man. And he issued quite a bit, and they called that all back in, and it never was let out again. That was all recalled, every note that he issued that said United States note. So it's not about the money. The money gets things done. It's about who issues the money and who can pull the purse strings in and out when they want to. It's just like, say you have the money here, here's the opening. It's just like they can squeeze it a bit and have a minor recession. They can tighten the strings, and that means we don't give any more loans. We raise the interest rates, we don't give any more loans, we call in certain loans. That's tightening it up. That's control. Every time they want a minor recession, they can have it. When people get sick of a big recession, goes on for years, they want to grab some oil. Of course, the oil is in there now. Soon it'll be water. Soon they'll be telling us how much water we've got to give them, because in the oil-based money, that's not working either, because every time in America you bring up an oil well, it's way below the surface. So every time you bring up an oil well there, you displace about 10 million gallons of good groundwater, aquifers. The United States, every time and 10 million gallons, they practically destroyed their whole aquifer system in the States, everywhere they're putting wells. The water's no good for 85,000 years or something. It's totally contaminated, and they have to use tens of millions of gallons to flush up an oil well. So of course they want the cheap oil in Arabia, where it's right under the sand. They want that, and they will get that. And if it comes to a vote and you say to Americans, well, it's either that or you don't drive your SUV anymore because we passed the peak oil, yeah, they're going to give their silent consent. I mean, come on, they call the Arabs the ragheads, the sand niggers. Do you think they care what happens to the Arabs? They're killing them off in droves. They're depopulating that whole area where the oil is. And if we didn't have a monetary system like this, we wouldn't need to be going around grabbing everybody's oil. It's all based on this. In fact, I heard a guy the other night on the radio who said, now his name was, I think he was on Richard Serrett. Yeah, I remember, I phoned in, yeah. His name is Matt Savinar. He's just a law student. But the funny thing was, he said on the show, he said, I wrote it down, we have a monetary system that requires constant growth. Now, when you have something that has constant growth, you have a cancer. There's growth and there's growth. A monetary system that requires constant growth, no matter what it is you're growing, that is a cancer. They go by the GDP, the gross domestic product. So every time there's a big oil spill, that drives up the GDP because their GDP is based on just transactions. It doesn't matter if it's about death. It doesn't matter if it's about everything's contaminated. The GDP is based on financial transactions. So what you've got here, you've got to know the difference between finance and economy. Finance and economy are two different things. Finance means if I finance you, I'm lending you something. That's what that means. I'm financing you. I'm lending you something. You do what I say. I control you. Economy is nothing about that. Economy is let's not create jobs that are going to kill other people. Let's create jobs. Thousands of them could be done cleaning up the messes we've made already. That would be thousands of jobs. Let's create jobs that make people's lives better and healthier. After all, if jobs are jobs and they contribute to the economy and jobs are good, why not have good jobs? Jobs that have a meaning, jobs that are going to help human beings. There's just as many jobs in that area. How come we don't have any of those? Because it's their scam again. This type of monetary scam requires a depopulation. It cannot last as long as the population is growing. It can only last, it's like musical chairs. If the population is depleting, it can last. So it's not even a question of jobs per se. They don't want all those good jobs. Have you heard anything lately about, hey, we're going to go to all those, whatever the dirty site is where they've dumped whatever, and we're going to clean it up, and it's going to cost, but you know what? It's going to create thousands of jobs. They could create thousands, if not millions, of jobs cleaning the filth they have put on this planet. Cleaning the water, cleaning the air, the pollution, the earth, doing away with pesticides. I mean, here's an example now, the pesticides. In the 50s, right after the war, they brought over all the leftover pesticides they were killing people with in Germany. Barrels and barrels of it, they had tons of it. And they said, because they were so smart, well, if it kills people, it should kill a bug. And so that, you know, let's bring them all over there. So then we got all the DDT, the pesticide, and they said to the farmers, you know what, this will help you because you're losing 1/3 of your crops now to bugs. Now once we bring over all these pesticides, you're going to have your whole crop there. So the farmers believed them. The whole earth now is saturated, except for maybe India and some out of the way, saturated with pesticides. The oceans are full of it. The animals in the ocean and fish are dying. And after 50 years of saturating this planet, every piece of land and water with pesticides, guess what? The farmer still loses 1/3 of his crop. Isn't that great? They didn't seem to think that even though we can be killed by pesticides, a bug who can live many lifetimes in a year builds up an immunity. So you have to use stronger and stronger pesticides. We don't have all that time to build up an immunity. We don't have 20 generations in 2 years, but a bug will. So they had to keep more and more stronger pesticides. Now there are ways. You don't need pesticides. You can plant certain flowers near your plants and they'll keep the bugs away. Certain plants are poisonous to bugs. They won't go near them. But they don't want to do it that way, no. It's the pills and the pesticides and the poison, and it all comes out of, as this guy said, we have a monetary system that requires constant growth. It's a cancer. This system we have is a cancer. So he said this 3 times. Now he said this 3 times, so I phoned in. And I said, why? I told him why this monetary system has to have constant growth. I said, because of the interest. I said, we should bring the creation of money back to governments so that we don't have enormous debts, which this is the engine that's driving this constant growth and put out more stuff we don't need. Once I said that, he mentioned that 3 times. Once I said that, he had another hour to talk. He never mentioned it again. Because I phoned in and I told him why. And he never mentioned it again on the show that night. So they do not like to hear. So I thought, well, he must be with the law firm of, you know. He said he was a student lawyer, so he's probably with Bunnell, Cliche, and Trite. So anyway, he didn't speak of it again after I phoned in. And he didn't like the idea that I had phoned in. Now I'm going to give you the names of the presidents who used government-created interest-free money. Here they are. Lincoln used it. Van Buren used it. Jackson used it. Jefferson used it. And Franklin used it, although he wasn't a president. But he started it out in the colonies using interest-free colonial scrip. So these are the men who actually used it, and I think we should add on Kennedy here, because I have the proof. I have the actual photostats of the bills, and they just said United States notes. And he put out over 4 billion of them. See, Lincoln put out 450 million. Kennedy put out 4 billion. And it was for that he was done away with. So,
Who's Franklin?
Benjamin Franklin, he was the one who went to England and they asked him at the bank over there, and the government, they said, the colonies are doing so well and everybody has a home and there's no people on the streets. Meantime, in England, they had taken away all the benefits of the poor completely, done away with the poor law, and people were lying on mattresses chained to pallets in debtors' prisons. England was full of debtors' prisons. Poor people who couldn't pay were thrown in prison, chained and tied to the bed until they could pay. Oh, it's like this scam here. How smart. You have to pay the bill, so we're going to tie your leg to the bed, and you can just wilt away on a straw pallet there. But of course, they wanted to come and take the person's home, belongings, whatever. If they were in prison, how could they pay a debt? So we can foreclose on everything. You see, the banks really don't want people to pay off the loans or the debt, because they'll get the interest compounding year after year. And then when they can't pay, they will take what they have. But the banks would much sooner have that interest rolling in year after year. They'll never want the debt to be paid. That's how it's working. It's compounding as I speak here. Next year they'll tell us we're 700 billion in debt. Oh, there goes the hydro, give that away to the private guys, same people. Oh, can't have any health care anymore, but never once will they tell you that when they tell you government expenses are high, that's the interest. What they call the interest, government expenses. They will never ever on any of their books have any column that says interest. It will be under government spending. Well, that's like me buying 10 different things and going home and saying, okay, this is called Sydney spending here. And somebody would say, well, what did you get? Oh, you don't need to know that. Here's Sydney's spending. There it is. That's my account, yes.
Is that why the government recently began encouraging interest-free mortgages, or not interest, but no down payment?
Yeah, no down
Trying to
payment.
encourage people to buy houses.
Oh, no down payment, but you won't get an interest-free mortgage anywhere, my dear.
Sorry, but, you know.
Yes, they encourage that because they want to. Yes, they want you to run up the mortgage, because you have to remember this. As much as they talk about inflation, they're trying to stop inflation. Here's another myth. Okay, we're getting into the myths now. In 1970, houses, say a semi-detached two-story house, was roughly about $25,000, okay? Those of you who can remember back that far? Just a normal semi-detached, two-story house on a regular street, $25,000. What are they now? $250,000. And yet they're saying they're keeping inflation down. They won't tell you what the real inflation is. Now, what are you making now? Are you making 10 times what you were in 1970? Have you been downsized? Do you even have a job now? Do you? Look, this is the real inflation. They don't want you to even think about that. Most young people can't afford a home now, so condos are big, where you buy the condo and then you rent it again because you're paying all these expenses every month to keep the condo going. That's an even better deal. You bought the damn place, but now you're paying $700 or $800 a month so that you can have security and the bloody heat and whatever. So now this is the other deal, because people cannot afford homes. This is what I'm talking about these architectural abortions that are just, you see on any side street in Toronto. I mean, ugly, ugly. That's what they cost now. In 70, it was $25,000 for that place, okay? So now they're trying to still say there's no inflation. But do you have an inflated salary? Does anybody here have the kind of salary? I'm saying not too many people now can even afford this little house. They're signing on to a lifetime of debt. Debt. And that house, over the 50 years that house has stood there, try and figure out how much money that house has made. And most of it in interest. Just go home one night, if you own a house or a mortgage, try and figure out, by the time your house is paid for, or if you've paid for it but you have the figures, try and figure out how many times you bought your house. Go home and figure that out. 3 times. You have bought 3 times, have you? Well, you must have bought it a while ago, because I would say anyone buying now can look at 6 times. And what is most of it? Interest, interest, interest that you're paying. And what happens with the mortgage? Now, I had a mortgage in Florida that went for 12 years and I never had to do anything about it. But here, they have this deal where you can get a 3-year mortgage, if you're lucky, a 5-year. But usually, you have to renegotiate that mortgage every few years. Now, when you renegotiate and they charge you a $1,000 fee, that wipes out anything you've paid on the capital in that house for your first 5 years. And so then you've got to pay for the lawyer and all of that to start up your next mortgage. So you don't even have one that ends, one mortgage that goes all the way through. You might have to apply for 4 or 5. Now, what if you're out of a job at that time when your mortgage comes for renewal?
You don't qualify.
If you have to renew your mortgage and you don't have a job, I hope you have a friend who will take a personal mortgage, because then you will have to sell your house. If you don't have someone who will give you a mortgage, you'll have to sell your house. Now, they're saying every time the Bank of Canada people, and there's IMF people in there, and they've been in there for a number of years, they talk about, oh, if we do that, if we take those loans back into the Bank of Canada, that will cause inflation. Well, what the hell is this? What is this, if not inflation? So that's another part of the scam that they're not going to tell you. You see. So now we're going to get into some more myths here, since we're here. Well, I'll give you a few more facts here. We'll do the U.S. debt now. We'll tell you how much the U.S. debt is, okay? The U.S. debt is over 17 trillion. 17 trillion, and no one ever asks, who's getting the interest on that? What? The government's not getting it because the government owes it. So to whom does the government owe the 17 trillion? Look over there. Just look over there. Now, that's the debt in the U.S. today. The debt service, now that's an interesting word. The debt service, all right? That's another euphemism they love. Means the interest on the compounding debt. So what is the debt service every year in the U.S.? This is the interest everybody's paying out now for this. The debt service is $400 billion a year. We're lucky, ours is only $45 billion. We're very lucky compared to the Americans. Debt service, $400 billion per year, and that's why you see Americans, even in Florida, standing there with big cardboard signs, "Will work for food." And I've seen it there. Now, let's just compare now. Consumer spending, this is what people spend all year down there. Consumer spending in the States is $260 billion. Now, that's less. Look, it's almost half, just half of what they're paying on the debt in interest. Now, this is all going to implode because it can't work. Now, the trade deficit. This means they're not selling as much as they're buying, okay? So they have a trade deficit. Now, the trade deficit, mostly with China, deficit, is $500 billion. There. And the U.S. is issuing debt. Now, when I say the U.S. is issuing debt, I'm talking about the phony money that's coming out in the loans, okay? It's debt money because it has to be paid with interest. So it's called a debt money system. So they're issuing debt money at the rate of, now you're not going to believe this, at the rate of $1.3 billion a day. Debt is the biggest killer on the planet. Debt drives the wars. Debt drives all the other ugliness. And the monetary systems around the world now in every country are this kind of a system, except for that little island of Guernsey and maybe Chavez before they kill him. Okay? So that is the, and all this money is going, of course, to the privatizers of the money system, those people over there. All that money is going to them. So that's why this guy came on the other night. Someone asked him, phoned in and said, well, how much money is Rothschild worth today? And he said, oh, he's worth 1,000, so many thousand trillion. So, yes?
I heard that the U.S. has a huge trade deficit with China.
I just said that.
Yeah, but what's going to happen when so the Chinese are trying to encourage the Americans to buy stuff, but if the Americans don't have the money to buy stuff, what's going to happen to the U.S.?
Well, I think the Americans are going to get in there and privatize everything they can in China because they're already saying that China's economy has got to go commercial. Okay? It's got to match. It's like when the Pakistan Supreme Court came out and said by 2000, the end of 2000, we're going to have an interest-free economy. And it never happened. And I said at the time, what are they going to be embroiled in that's going to take away their opportunity to start an interest-free economy? Well, they're now embroiled in it.
So China doesn't have any chance of getting the money from the States?
No, it's not that. It's not even about money. It's about control of another country. Let's put it this way. Everything that China's sending now. Now, I know Americans who won't buy anything that says made in China. In fact, a lot of them didn't like NAFTA. And they went around telling people, don't buy anything unless it says made in USA. There was a huge, Americans did not want NAFTA. No. Nobody wanted NAFTA. So what's happening with China now is they're using prison labor, they're using slave labor, and Walmarts. And see, so the Americans are aiding and abetting this debt slavery. So what they're going to have to do is, like Kissinger's been in China off and on over the last 20 years, he's already figured that out. For one thing, China's now got AIDS, and where the SARS started in China, I might as well tell you this because nobody else, the media that I gave it to, and I've got all the proof of it, the SARS started at one of those American biotech firms in that very province in China. They either leaked it purposely or just leaked it. But there's 2 American biotech firms in that province in China, and China allowed them to come in and do that there because they were paid to allow that. So they're going to work hand in glove, and of course the Chinese people are just going to be as expendable as paper cups, which they are now. See, cartelism and communism are really one and the same. We're not discussing free enterprise. That's long gone. We don't have free enterprise here anymore. It's all cartels. If you're not in a cartel, if you haven't merged with 20 other companies, you're nowhere. So the Chinese will get in on that because the government totalitarianism is basically the same as corporate totalitarianism. They're 2 sides of the same coin. So they will work a deal with China, but of course the people are all going to go down in the middle. That's what's going to happen with China, because the Chinese all want cars now. The Chinese all want, the big, the TVs, the cars. They want everything. And they're willing to work, to get all these things.
So what did they do in Pakistan?
Pardon?
What did you know? You said that they weren't.
Yeah, well, you weren't here last week, but that was in one of the handouts. I had the newspaper article just before. In fact, I think it was 1999. In Christmas, December, and the Pakistan Supreme Court announced to the world that Pakistan would have an interest-free economy before the end of 2000. Okay? And it said in the same article that the international banking community was extremely worried because that could cause the downfall of the banking system. I'm amazed they were even that honest about it. But because now people think the banking system is all right, did we ever have any other kind? It's amnesia, And this is brought on by the fact that they don't talk about money or economics anymore. It's just the jargon of the loan business, the pawnbrokers, the financiers have taken the place of a real economy. So when these people came out and said that, they all knew their days were numbered. Something had to happen over there so big. Now maybe they did have plans to go get the oil, but maybe this hurried it up a bit. Well, let's not wait till, let's do it now and involve Pakistan in all of this. But I do have the article, and you all got it last week, so that's what happened in Pakistan.
I just wanted to mention.
Oh, sorry. Did you speak yet? Did you? Oh, okay, let's be fair here.
How do you buy back the debt from people that control it here? What is the government? If you wanted to transfer it back to the government at low interest or low income?
Yeah, you could.
Wouldn't all these people have to be paid off?
No. They would be paid on the interest right up to the day of bringing the loan, like I said, to the Bank of Canada. Of course their interest would be paid as long as they have the loan. But if the government could say to these private banks, and they wouldn't do it all at once, it would have to be done the same way it was put out there, incrementally over time, so it wouldn't upset the economy. If we had an honest prime minister, you'd say, okay, we'll start with the oldest loans, and I want this one and this one this year to go back into the Bank of Canada. They're not going to be cheated. They'll have their interest right up until the day it's moved. But you see, what they did to us, to use an analogy, is this. Say that you bought a home and you had a wonderful mortgage. You happen to get a mortgage at 1%, which is what our Bank of Canada charged, or nothing, to the government. So then you had this mortgage, you go on paying it, you think, God, in 10 years my house is paid for, this is great, couldn't be better. And so about the third or fourth year along, suddenly you get a notice in the mail with your new monthly payment and it's gone up $100. You go, what? You rush down to your bank. You say, what's happened here? I'm paying 1%, I've been paying it all this time, and your bank manager says to you, oh yes, forgot to tell you. We took your loan out of our bank and we gave it to this bank over here, and now they want to charge you 10%. Sorry. That's exactly what they did to us. That's why it's illegal. It shouldn't have been done. We had no control. There was no referendum, nothing. Those loans that were in our bank at 1% were suddenly in other banks at 4%, 5%, 6%, and so now we pay $45 billion every year in unnecessary interest. Now, who else has a question that hasn't? Okay, you.
How did this happen historically? Like, who actually gave away the money to the private banks?
Well, Mackenzie King, when he said only 50%.
But later on, you said that 1974 they gave it.
Chrétien became finance minister. It's not any one person. It's a policy. So whoever steps into the minister's job of finance, the policy was changed. They follow the policy. So most loans coming in after that are farmed out to private banks. It's never one person, it's a policy. And how that policy comes about is the same way in 1913 when they did this amendment here. This amendment probably wasn't even noticed. It probably was a little excerpt in a paper like this, but look, they didn't ask you. Look at the difference it made. And so people were going deeply into debt, but they knew more about it then. So they really got on to him. He had to promise something. So he promised that the Bank of Canada would produce 100% of the money if he got in as Prime Minister. And he got in, and he switched it to 50% because of Rockefeller. So that's what happened. You cannot divorce economics from politics. They do that in the schools, though. If you go and you take economics here, they won't talk anything about politics. You go and take political science, they won't talk economics. These things are always combined. One rules the other. If you're born into a poor family, you're probably going to turn out to be a socialist. If you're born into a rich family, you're going to be like Harper. You know, even if he wasn't. He likes the idea, you know, the idea of being superior and having more money. So this is what's happened now in the States, and the debt money that they're pushing out of the banks is that much every day.
Sydney,
now,
do you think that this is going to affect our present democracy?
It already has.
Well, allow me to
No, it's okay. No.
But what my concern is today is how democracy is being eroded, and I'm wondering if this is really going to push democracy out of the picture.
What, this money system?
Democracy that we know today.
We have, actually, to tell you the truth, as Kennedy said once, or somebody said, democracy is a wonderful idea. I think it was Gandhi said, democracy is a wonderful idea, and someday we might have some. I mean, there has been no democracy because, and I'll tell you why. Remember this, without economic democracy, there can be no democracy. Economic democracy is the real democracy. Well, I'll give you an example. Even when I was small, I think I was about 9 years old, and I had this book, and it was called Days of Democracy, and I called it Days of Democracy. I mean, I was only 9, what did I know? It sounded like a nice word to me, democracy, whatever. Anyway, you cannot have without economic democracy. It's impossible. For instance, the land of the free, blah, blah, is based on an assumption, a very false premise that everyone at birth has equal opportunity. No, they do not. And the only way to level that out is to have social programs, is to have a social infrastructure so that at least everyone can have a roof over their head, basic food needs, and health care. Without that basic infrastructure, there's no hope for having democracy. And with money produced by a lot of private pawnbrokers that demand exorbitant interest, there's no way any country can have democracy. No way at all. So they believe this illusion. That's why your books, The Illusion of Democracy, the essay that I wrote, that you're picking up tonight, will explain that to you. It's impossible without economic democracy to have a real democracy. And this does not mean communism. Marxism is just as bad as overrunning capitalism. They're two sides of the same coin. What we have to have is a balance. So now I'm going to show you the balance. So we've done the myths. The banks only lend deposits, big lie. Government creates money, big lie. We can pay off Canada's debt, another big lie. We have a reserve in the Bank of Canada, another lie. Myth 4, Canada's assets are low, so we have to borrow from these guys, biggest lie of all. And a nation can go bankrupt, another big lie. A nation can't go bankrupt as long as there are people there, even if they have to build clay houses out of mud and do their own planting. A nation cannot go bankrupt, but when these bankers are not going to be paid any more interest, they declare you bankrupt. You're bankrupt nation, you can't pay us. Even if you say, go to hell, we've already paid our debt 5 times over. This is it, we're not paying any more on it. It's paid. So then they'll call you bankrupt. You won't get any credit with any of these fabulous families. And your country, they'll tell your country can just flounder then. But all you need is people, your resources. The people add value to the resources. And the country prints money through its government based on all the resources, not something stupid like gold. Come on. That went, even Keynes didn't believe in that. So now we're going to go on to just a sec. I'm going to show you a system that actually could have worked, and that Congress in 1932 voted for this system overwhelmingly in a bill called the Goldsboro Bill. I have a copy of it, the House of Representatives, 1932. Voted overwhelmingly to use this kind of an economy by about 160 to 40, and it was squashed before it got to the Senate. Squashed. So anyway, I'll be explaining that now. And just that one question before I start.
Does Paul Hellyer of the CAP Party, does he not talk about taking the money?
Of course he does, yeah.
Private banks and putting it?
Yes, Paul Hellyer actually was in government for quite a while. Then he discovered later on in life what the banks were really doing, and he's been talking about it ever since. He's had 3 or 4 books out. He belongs to the Canada Action Party that he's chosen, or somebody's chosen Connie Fogel to lead it. It's all about our money, yes. But they figure Paul Hellyer's getting on. I mean, he's 80 or something, and Connie Fogel might give it a good try, but they're not worried about it. These people are not worried about that. Because if push comes to shove, they're in the majority. I don't care if they are only 3%, 1% of the people. They've got all the money to buy all the guns. So if I'm alone in a room with 20 people and I have a machine gun, I'm the majority. Don't kid yourself. It's not anything to do with numbers. If I have the power, I'm the majority. So that's why it's hard to have a democracy when you've got one tiny group issuing the money when they want to issue it, pulling it back when they want to pull it back. It has nothing to do with our value or the work we're doing. It's just purely on a whim of how much interest, how many more properties and resources can we grab. If we give them another depression, just pull that money in, give them a depression where there's no money, even though everything else is there, but we manage the purse strings. So as I told you, it's like the guy with the theater. The theater with 500 seats. He issues tickets, 300 tickets. This is our economy now, in a nutshell. Everyone comes to get in to see the show, the citizens. He sells 300 tickets, they come in. Then he says, okay, no more tickets, everyone go home. The people still waiting in line look in the door and they say, yeah, but there's 200 more seats in there. Haven't got enough tickets. Now that's what they've done with our money. Everything we need is there. The people are there to perform all those jobs. Money is numbers. That's all it is. It's numbers. It's to get things done. It's to give you a share in your country's resources. It's to give you the respect and whatever you have earned, and earned by simply being a citizen. That's what money is, okay? It should not be a commodity. They've turned it into a commodity. They bet on it. They manipulate economies by betting on this dollar, that dollar. This should never have been done. Money should never have been turned into a commodity. But if you privatize something, that's what it is. So our hydro will end up being a commodity so that old people will freeze to death in their homes in the winter. They can't afford the heat. They can't afford the heat. Think of that. Same with water. When they poisoned everything else, we're buying water now. And several companies have a grip on the water. The air is so polluted, if they could bottle fresh air, they would, and sell it to people. And our health care is up for grabs. And the excuse is that we cannot afford it. And it's all about that. We might as well be in the United States because our system is copying them now exactly. Exactly. So that's what's happening here. Yeah?
I just wonder, Sydney, how this has all been kept so successfully out of our education system, in our schools, in our colleges, and our universities. And I know you mentioned the technical science, that's what you learn in the it's not never integrated, but it just seems to be absolutely astounding how it could have been kept so successfully out of our general education.
Well, if you have all the money and you've manufactured it from thin air, and it doesn't cost you anything to write a check for $5 billion, and you can fund those universities. You fund those medical laboratories that sell you 100,000 Canadians die every year from prescription drugs alone. So if you have your hand on the printing press, you can buy off anybody and buy anything. We've got to take the printing press away from these people. They didn't have it at the start of history, but now the media is paid, everything is paid, so that you can hear a guy on the news talk about the debt.
Well, I understand that the media, the control, I understand at the
Yes.
university level, the corporations that run the
Yes.
corporations, but at the school level, the control of the curriculum.
Do you mean public school? What?
Universities.
No, well, no, of course they control the curriculum. If I am a teacher of economics and I come in here and I was to give a class like this, I wouldn't last a week. Not a week. I would be gone. So you've got professors who worry about tenure. You've got everybody where it's I'm in the boat, shove off, okay? Because if you have a right-wing fascist agenda, you create those kind of people. People grow up thinking, this is a dog-eat-dog. I have to watch out for myself and nobody else, so I'll do what's best for me, and that's how they divide everybody. Yes, absolutely. They get everybody thinking in terms of, well, as long as I'm okay, well, why give a damn about the other guy? And that's the kind of philosophy they foster in the university. Competition, competition.
I understand that the university level, I'm thinking at the school level.
Even in high school, you hear nothing. In high school, you hear nothing, my dear, absolutely nothing. That's everybody, the publishers, the media, the television, the books, they're all controlled and owned by the same people who own our money. Get this, money, the privatization of our money system was the very first privatization. Without that one, none of the others could follow. None of the others could follow. I mean, that's the hard line here. And I don't know what's going to happen before this is taken away from them, but I can suggest one thing, that is Canada, with our own bank, where I've given you the page of the charter, our own bank can still lend to us. We've got to push for that. Jack Layton talked about it, but not recently. I think somebody warned him. But they said when he was first elected on 2 different television shows, if we become federal, we will take those private loans out of those foreign banks and we will put them back into the Bank of Canada. And that would save us that $45 billion a year. Now we could do a lot with that unnecessary interest we're paying. Now, they've only mentioned it when he got elected. They have not mentioned it for months, and I've talked to him about it. But when you get into that subject, this is the most dangerous subject you can ever discuss. Very dangerous. And if I had 1,000 people in a lecture room, instead of whom I have here, I would be watched, I would be surveilled, maybe even now, I don't know. This is the best and best kept secret there is. Now, in his early books, David Icke had a whole chapter on the money question and what was going on. But then, as he wrote other books, he got involved in this reptilian thing. And so now people will not take his other chapters seriously. So I'm wondering how that happened. Because if, to tell you the truth, say that some aliens did come down here in their spaceship and they landed, maybe they would be reptilians. Who cares what you look like? It's what's in here that counts. So they land here. The first people up the gangplank would be the IMF and their sharp lapels saying, let us lend you the money to start here. And I said to Ike, within a year, the poor reptilians would be just as badly off as we are. So who cares if they come or they don't come? You know, it doesn't matter, all right? So this class is not about political correctness. We're not going to discuss Sasquatch or alien proctologists, or none of those will be discussed in here. This is a class about what's happening to us, what's happening now, and the facts of it. That's what that's about. So now, I don't know. Oh, that's totally, who knows. Anyway, I want to go into the last part of this to tell you why the Congress in 1932 passed this Goldsboro bill 160 to 40. And after that, now this is the closest bill they've ever done that comes close to the social credit idea. Now, we're under social debt right now. Social credit has nothing to do with socialism, with communism, with Nazism. That was all a lot of drivel so that people would stop thinking about this, okay? And actually, back in the time of Douglas, and I will explain to you who Douglas was. He was an engineer. He did huge projects for the British Crown. It was around 1921 that he started in India doing huge projects. His wife was an engineer. He was an engineer. And he had a project to do in India, building a bridge. So all the people were there, all the cement and material and everything was there. And he said, okay, let's get started. We're going to do the bridge. And the town or city said, no, we can't do the bridge. He said, why? I've got thousands of people. I've got all the material. They said, no money. We have no money. So Douglas, being an engineer, because I trust an engineer over any other kind of science, because that's just what it means. You follow, form follows function. You do the most explicit and shortcut you need to do to make something work. So he said, well, if I have the men and I have the materials, just because I don't have money, so he started thinking about it, and he thought, isn't this so stupid? I don't know if the bridge ever got built, but the point was it started him thinking, and he started thinking about this formula that I'm now going to put on the board. Now the difference, what happened with Douglas was he was so popular with these ideas. He said, no, people should not be given social debt. People should be given social credit. Now do you understand what social credit means? Doesn't mean socialism, but they've twisted all the information about it around so that people will never think about it again. And when it came out in 32, they knew about it on every continent. He was on all kinds of radio shows. People were talking about it, and governments were thinking about using it. And then in 1932, when he talked in the States and this went through Congress, it scared them to death. Even the Russians said at the time, we're not afraid of capitalism. We're only afraid of this social credit idea of Douglas. So what happened in 1932? These people spent $23 million, that's big money for 32, to get Douglas off the air. He was never to have another lecture in America anywhere. He was never to appear on any radio show, nothing. They spent $23 million getting rid of these ideas because they were so dangerous. Even the Russians said, there's only one thing we fear, that's Douglas. And the United States, after this went through Congress, said the same thing. So that stopped that. They didn't kill him. But I'll just, in 1929, he addressed the World Engineering Congress in Tokyo, and his subject was application of engineering methods to finance. So this is what he did with it. And then I will explain to you, he's got a 3-part formula here. And the first part of it, of course, is what we had. Money created by government bank at no interest. And no country has ever been allowed, ever, to try all 3 parts of his formula. If they try one part, they'll say, oh, Douglas's ideas failed. Look, you failed. And he said to them, unless you use all 3 parts of the formula, it's not going to work. So I will describe it for you now, and any moron or economic illiterate that comes up to you and says, and I've heard them say, oh, Douglas, yes, that was that anti-Semitic Nazi stuff out west. And so this is what's gone on so that people will not think about it, because if they started using this in 32, this would all be gone. There would be no debt, no huge debt today. And these people would just be in little tiny banks lending what they had, not pretending they had money and lending it. So the first part of the formula is money must be issued by government without debt, which is no interest on it. So I'll just say at no interest. And of course, if it's issued by government, it will be at no interest, because supposedly we are the government, and we are not going to be using money that's going to have interest on it from the very beginning. We're not that stupid. So that's the first part. The second part is welfare. The humiliation of welfare will be replaced by a national credit office, which would send a monthly dividend to each citizen, whether he has a job or not. In doing this, the government acknowledges that citizens are assets and shareholders in their country, whether their contributions and labor are volunteered or appear in the form of jobs. Now, there was an article you got last week, you got it at home, in the Star, and the title was, "It's Time for a Citizen's Income." That's exactly what the title was. You cannot have a job for everybody no matter what you do. And you cannot continue to use people up like they're paper cups and have them working for $1 a day or whatever, or nothing in prison. I think prisoners should work, sure. But don't let the corporations make the money on it. If they're going to work, give the money to the government and let it get back to the people who are victimized. But in the prisons, it's all corporations. They've got them in there making furniture, making reservations on planes. They're doing everything. And in China, they're selling organs from political prisoners who get shot in the head so as not to destroy any of these organs. So, I mean, people are resources, and the way things are going, people are going to be more physical resources. You know, if you've got good organs and you're fairly young, that'll be you. You'll be contributing whether you like it or not. So we have here a national dividend, whether you have a job or not. And Douglas had one rule. He said, if you earn in a month 4 times more than what the dividend is, then you'll forsake the dividend. But anybody who doesn't make 4 times the dividend will get the dividend. So it was very fair.
And that would value women and
everyone, every adult in the country.
Yeah, because women who raise families are devalued.
Yeah, you weren't here last week. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, most of the free labor on the globe is women, okay? So then 3, his third step, was a little bit more complicated, but not very. Now, it was called the compensated discount. That sounds very complicated, but it isn't. I'll tell you what, here, let me get some space here. The compensated discount was what made it work, and the compensated discount was what they did not understand or didn't want to understand. And it makes perfect sense, and anyone in here who studied engineering will realize that economics is engineering, and it can be engineered to suit any philosophy. And as I said, ours is totally fascist. You're made to seem as if you're lucky to be alive, you're a liability. Why should we even pay you anything? Get out there, get some kind of a job, even if it kills people. So, Now, for instance, in the national accounts that year, if the, for instance, if the national accounts show that in a year, the total production was 500 billion, okay? Put it over here. 500 billion, that's the production, okay, for the year. But the total consumption, okay, consumption was only 400 billion, okay? So the total consumption was 400 billion that year. Because people don't actually buy every single thing that's on the shelf. I mean, you don't have, at the end of an inventory, you don't have stores completely empty. So this is the formula, 400 billion of consumption. Then the cost of production is what has been consumed that year, which is this here, okay? Now, the 1 billion difference that has not been sold, all right? The 1 billion difference is still lingering in stores. It hasn't been sold. Now this is over the whole country. So what Douglas suggested was this, that the retailer, not the guy in the factory, they've all been paid. The retailer who still has these products in his store gives everyone a 20% discount, okay? A discount at the retail level, okay? Only at that level. Because everyone who's manufactured the stuff's being paid, except for the guy in the store. He has not. So he's got this much left, all the stores around the country. He gives a discount to the people coming in of 20%. Hopefully they buy more then to reduce the consumer goods by 20%. And then the National Credit Office would compensate the retailer by the same 20%. All right? So he gives the discount, the retailer gives the discount, and the government compensates him. Say that whatever he sold on the discount, he just sends then his list into the government. And they replenish that 20% discount that he gave to the people. So that was Douglas's formula. So the only part they've ever used is this one, and very rarely, and even when they got to use this one, people were killed for doing that. But this was his formula, compensated discount, only at the retail level. And it's not, it wouldn't cover every little detail, but that basically would work with a few adjustments.